Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Abby Wilson, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the Homes England Winter Learning Programme, where we offer a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics that you've told us are of interest to you. So today's session is called How to Engage and Create a Coalition of the Willing to Support Place-Based Working. So just to cover some background context, the Winter Learning Programme is brought to you by the Homes England Local Government Capacity Centre. And this slide just summarises who the Local Government Capacity Centre are and what our mission is. So we established the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities most need support and how we can best deliver this to you. Next slide, please. The learning programme is just one of the tools offered by the Local Government Capacity Centre. So we also offer the Housing Information Hub. So that's a national index of professional resources to support house building. We have the new Homes fact sheet. So this is fact sheets to support local authorities with the case for housing development and regeneration. And finally, we have a capacity analysis tool, which you can use to assess capacity. So we look forward to hearing about how we did in the survey poll at the end of the session. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a breakdown for today before passing over to our first speaker. So first of all, we will be hearing from John Till. So John's the Director of Thinking Place, and he'll be talking to us about becoming place-led and the importance of stimulating your stakeholders. Then we will hear two place-specific case studies. So first we'll hear from Alan Denby, who is the Director of Pride in Place at Torbay Council. Then we'll hear from Rachel Bailey, who is the Burnley Place Brand Manager. And then finally, we'll hear from Homes England's Chris Standish on how Homes England works to understand and engage communities. We'll then be finishing with a Q&A session, and I will be drawing the session to a close with some further polls to get some immediate feedback on how you have found the session and any ideas for future sessions. So without further ado, it's time to get started on our session for today. So please do remember to ask your questions in the chat while our presenters are speaking, but I'm going to hand you over to our first presenter, John Till. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Abby. Great to be with everybody this morning. I'm just going to share screen.
Yes, yeah, that's great now.
Cool. Okay. At the heart of everything we do is creating a place-led scenario, and that means stakeholders. And if the stakeholders aren't involved, it isn't going to work, basically, in terms of place development. So when we get into every place, we always ask them, what does success look like for your place if you're developing a narrative, if you're trying to involve people? Well, of course, what they'd like is they'd like more funding, or they'd like private sector investment. They'd probably like new infrastructure, most places do. Regeneration. And all these are incredibly valid points for places to make. But usually we start with a very challenging scenario. And that challenging scenario is about where the stakeholders are. We usually find a lot of apathy, fragmentation, a lack of unity, people with their pet projects. And although we often get told, right, that people, right, are very, very connected to the place, usually those relationships are actually not there. So this is the infrastructure that I would worry about. Where are the people? Where are the organisations? Because places succeed through leadership, through collaboration, not just pots of money. And the stakeholders, they are your point of difference. Councils cannot develop places by themselves. They need the stakeholders. And what can they give you? Well, they can give you absolutely loads. And just think of the latent talent in your place. If only you could mobilize it. And usually these people are hugely enthusiastic, want to get involved, but don't necessarily know how to do that. So no place can have too much collaboration. So creating this coalition of the willing, people coming together behind their place, just wanting their place to succeed, is massively important. But you can't just sit there and say to stakeholders, well, we want you to get involved. They need a process. They need purpose in terms of why they would do that. So whilst we have places who say, oh, we'd love to set up a place board, we'd love to have an ambassador program, you can only get to these mechanisms if there is buy-in, if there is a process, if stakeholders want to play in this world. And the route for that is that creation of that forward-looking narrative. It gives it the context and it is the catalyst for it happening. So I think in terms of this, it is so important that you develop the narrative through the eyes of the stakeholders, because they need a story to tell. And what this does is it helps the stakeholders think differently, it helps them act differently, and it connects them to the place. They feel empowered. Status quo in places is just not an option. And within this, it's really important that to understand that the whole, as in the stakeholders, the assets of the place, are far greater than the sum of the parts. So this is about unification, collaboration. It is that coalition that is talked about at the front of this programme. And we also have to understand as well that the place is more than the anchor institutions, however important they are. We know they are, the council, universities, etc. Everyone has a part to play. So what we have to do is get those stakeholders involved, to communicate with them, to infuse them, inspire them. And yes, it takes time, it takes energy and desire to get the stakeholders revved up. But boy, it is definitely worth the time. So most critically, you have to sustain this effort as well. And as you're probably aware, every place has had a go at this. They've had a go at creating a narrative. They may have tried to do it through a place marketing route. They've climbed the mountain, and most of them have fallen off the other side. Why? Because it's been left too much to the council. It needs a shared effort. It needs shared ambition. So how? How do we do that? Well, we do that by doing things differently. We do that by exciting people, inspiring people, empowering and involving them. And if the stakeholders are in that position, they're thinking and acting differently, all of a sudden they are part of the place team. What we do have, though, is too many places where they just do rinse and repeat, and they expect a different result. It just isn't going to happen. If you bring people together, thinking outside the box, you get amazing results. And we see that time and time again in very different ways, in very different places. This is Hemel Hempstead, ex-Newtown, and going through a period of reinvention. So they created their place story that led to hugely influential place board that has come together to lead on the regeneration and the selling of that new story. So all of a sudden, the development of Hemel Hempstead is not just sat in the hands of the council, it's sat in the hands of the place with the stakeholders. In North Nottinghamshire, they created their ambassador programme as part of sustaining this. So people on a bi-monthly basis could hear what's going on in the place. They could visit different venues, as you see here, and they could hear from people that are making it happen. So all of a sudden, a connected community, people who are understanding what's going on, so they could go away and tell those stories. In Staffordshire, they got their stakeholders to sell the place by their first ever investment prospectus. It only worked because they'd involved the stakeholders from the start in creating that narrative, the stakeholders understanding what the opportunities are, so they would then go out and deliver it. Carlisle ended up at UK Reef. the major property event in Leeds, about to have its third year. They'd never done that before. And they weren't just there as the council, they were there as the place. And Coventry winning UK City of Culture for 2021-22. You know, when we worked with them 12 years ago, even suggesting that would have been laughed at, let alone them actually going on and winning it. And that just been part of their journey. And that coalition of the willing, that coming together can be incredibly long lasting. And, you know, Burnley, 15 years, you're going to hear from Rachel. I will not steal her thunder, but it is a wonderful story. It really is, of sustaining an effort. And finally, if we look at Hull, you know, Hull 30 years into a place-led programme with their bondholder ambassador scheme. And so much has come out of that. And one of the big things that came out of it, which is why I urge you to do this, is at one of those ambassador meetings, the president of Smith and Nephew, the vice chancellor of the university, over a bacon butty and a coffee, started talking about developing a wound management institute at the university. 5 years later, that came into being. So it just shows, right, that it is really, really worth it. And getting that coalition requires inspiration and perspiration. But as I say, it will reap you huge rewards. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Alan Denby, Director of Pride in Place at Torbay Council.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. So my name's Alan Denby. As John said, I'm Director of Pride in Place for Torbay. I've been with Torbay for a very long time, until 2021, sat within our economic development company, and in my current role since 2023, and working around economy in place for pretty much the entirety of the time that I've been here. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk to you this morning about a little bit about where Torbay is, what we are, why we believe we need change, what we've done to bring that change about, a little bit about how it's going, and certainly what we've learned. And there's been a lot of learning that we've been picking up. And I think this process, it never stops, because whether officers change, members change, stakeholders change, and we will always be in the place where we need to keep telling the story. So we recognised in 2016, following a local government association peer review, that the council, and similar to what John was setting out, the council was trying to do almost too much to drive the agenda on its own. So we reintroduced at that point a strategic partnership for Torbay, and we started to coalesce around some of the principles that we wanted to be able to address. I'll come back in a second to explain where we've got the Torbay story from, but that in itself was a really important step for Torbay. We had an elected mayor from 2005 to 2018, but we had stopped a strategic partnership in 2011. And some of the points that you can hopefully see on the screen around what is the Torbay story and why did we need to create it, they were really, I think, very misunderstood, and it was missing from Torbay at that point in time. So we wanted to find a way to pick up exactly that final bullet point about how can we unleash what people want to be able to see, and the commitment that our partners across the whole of the Bay have for the place. If we move on to the next slide, please. So we created it because Torbay is a place that desperately needs change, and what we'd found in the 5 years prior to the strategic partnership being reinstated was that political leadership, business leadership, the civic leadership was not always very neatly aligned, maybe a little bit underpowered compared to some of our regional partners. And we were certainly, with the local enterprise partnership and with other parts of our regional system, we didn't have a strong enough voice. We were moving then towards the end of the elected mayor's position. So we had a referendum to switch away from an elected mayor to go back to a leader in cabinet system, which took place in 2019. And with that sort of change, you can imagine that the political voice was weaker than it should be for a place of this size. So statistically, Torbay is a place of 138,000, 139,000 people. The population increases, as you'd expect with a coastal resort. It increases in the summer with the different needs of our visitors. And the three towns that comprise Torbay have distinct roles. We wanted to be able to find a way to address and understand what those roles are so that we can find a way to make that change. And that was very much around increasing the awareness of what Torbay's offer is, excuse me, and then to attracting investment. And we recognized that there are always stories of places. John referred to place marketing in his comments. As a resort, as a destination, we trade under the label of the English Riviera, and there's a very well-established set of messages which are promoted for Torbay at that time. If you talk to any of our businesses, if you talk to our community, they'll all have their own story of place. What we wanted to be able to do was find a way to engage with those partners, with those stakeholders, and then shape their perceptions of the place, but also understand how we can then translate that into something which the outside world wants to be able to get. And one of the challenges for us is when we talk about we, who is that we? So it's not the council. We've been really clear in a Torbay perspective that this can't be a council-owned and solely council-driven process. There are some practical challenges with that, which are around where does the resource come from, the staffing, the cash to drive some of these things forward. But at least in spirit, that needs to be a far broader we than what we have. So what was put forward by John and his colleagues was this big idea. So following quite a bit of consultation, which I'll come back to onto the next slide, the Torbay story for us is culminated around this concept of Torbay as the premier marine and natural experience. So drawing on our position with Dartmoor close by, the bay and the channel, we've got this real natural asset, which is captured within our UNESCO Geopark designation, that we can be able to position ourselves really neatly in terms of how we sit alongside Exeter and Plymouth within geographic Devon. We've got some opportunities to do a lot more around high value economy with electronics and photonics, which has been some of our place marketing theme that we've worked on hard, and then using that natural base to become this hub for active adventurers, which we see partly helping us address some of our challenges as a destination. Like a lot of English seaside resort places, the demographics of our visitors are steadily getting older. Our population's getting older, and what we need to be able to do is make sure we've got a slightly different balance within our population and with our visitors. So we are really keen to use these to a way to be able to attract visitors, attract investment. And it's been very deliberate decision by our place partners to make sure that the Torbay story is a very positive message. It's also a very much an externally focused message. If we could move to the 2 slides on, please. Apologies, colleagues. So to get to this point, what had we done? I had heard John speak at a Solace regional event in Bristol just before the pandemic. I was struck by his knowledge, by his passion, but the clarity, the sense that he spoke with about the need to develop a place story. And what we had done up to that point was through our strategic partnership. We'd been looking to some of our regional partners. We looked at what Exeter had done, for instance, what Plymouth had done around the Britain's Ocean City, around Bristol, and one Bristol strategy. But what we took, I think, from what John and Thinking Place brought for us was the need to learn from other places, but really to understand what is our own way. So bringing in Thinking Place, I think, was an incredibly important and powerful step for us to be able to start to pick up with our strategic partners, with our stakeholders, and move through to the creation of the Place Leadership Board. But to get to that point, there was a lot of conversations which we needed to have internally with officer colleagues, with members, so that they started to move into this position where there was a greater understanding of whatever place is for different people. And these conversations, they don't stop. They are a work in progress right now. They are important that we keep them going forward. If I just give you an example, prior to 2021 and to Thinking Place's involvement, there was no director of place within Torbay. My job title is slightly different from the director of place who was in role at the time. Until that point, we hadn't really civically understood or started to have those conversations about place. So something there where you have to want to be able to be in that space as an organization and want to find a way to do something different. So the first practical change that we saw as a consequence of Thinking Place's involvement was the relabeling of the strategic partnership to be the Torbay Place Board. And hopefully you can see on the screen that their role is to be the guardians of the Torbay story. So they don't need to bring in stacks of reports or to necessarily to come up with a whole host of different ideas, but we're using the Torbay story as our central point, and they need to make sure that the activity which is being driven through the Place Board comes back to it. To support the Place Board, what we're looking to be able to bring forward now is that wider voice. So ambassadors, bondholders, whatever the framing it might be within your area, we're calling these our Torbay champions. So we've been developing this as a network over the last 18 months. We have regular meetings. There's email correspondence as well. There are improvements which we need to make. I think we need to challenge or activate those champions a little bit more, a little bit better than we have done up to this point. But that comes back to the resource challenge, which local authority colleagues on the call will recognise is always going to be one of those tensions. But we've absolutely recognised that the importance of place is paramount for us to be able to deliver what we need to be able to do, so that we can get the economic figures changing within Torbay. And the experience that we've had within the Place Board is that there is a confidence and there is a willingness to challenge in the right way that simply wasn't there 2 or 3 years ago. We've heard in the last 6 months from partners who've come into those meetings how refreshing it is to hear the shared commitment for partners to challenge some of the decisions that the council is making, but then doing it in such a way that they expect and that then in the public domain that they will be supporting that. And that, for somebody who's worked here for a long time, is a transformation, a whole transformation from where we were previously. It'd be really for those partners to say exactly how it's working, but from our perspective, it's gone very, very positively. If we move to the next slide, please. So one of the other important changes was taking the message out, and these are images which are from UK Reef last year, and this was the first time that Torbay had been to an event like this. I think it was a very brave step by the council. We were supported financially by our place partners with this as well. We made a very conscious decision to use the place story as the binding point of our presence. And if you can imagine the first day when I arrived, and colleagues have been up there a little bit earlier to set up. When I arrived, the first stand I saw was Birmingham City Councils, and as you would expect, it was prominent, setting out all the different opportunities that the city has available. We, as you can probably see there, we had a pretty small stand, and I was quite nervous on walking past as to how we'd been responded to in the hall. But the feedback which I had from my colleagues who were there was that by 11 o'clock, all of our concerns about taking the space and committing to do this, they were just completely dispelled. So from our perspective, and I'm absolutely not on a commission from Built Environment in saying this, we had a hugely successful attendance at Reef. It's been a very positive experience for us, so much so that we've committed to attending again this year and then next year. And the feedback that we had about our stand was also very positive in terms of the clarity of the message that we would not have had without me being able to put forward the Torbay story. If we move to the next slide, please. So just trying to capture some of the lessons that we've learned over the last 3 years or so with this. It absolutely is the right thing for us to be able to do. What we found is it's brought leaders together from across Torbay. It has helped create that different culture, a willingness to collaborate, a willingness to share ideas, to think externally. The Champions program has been, I think, a real surprise to us in terms of the overall numbers that we've had signed up, but there's absolutely that recognition that we have to be able to do more. So we talked within our place board about how we make sure that there is a proper translation of the very, as I said, the very externally focused Torbay story message, so that this is something which is absolutely real for people. So we're using Torbay story as a way in which we can attract investment. Some of the challenges which we hear, and this is where good communications and marketing comes in internally, some of the challenges which we hear are that actually if you're living in some of our more disadvantaged parts of the Torbay, this doesn't feel real yet. So translating what we're saying to the outside world, but also then making sure that it's something which is credible, frankly, for our community is going to be an ongoing challenge for us. But in saying that, we're recognizing that this is something which is going to take a long period of time. You can't reshape a place, make a place overnight, irrespective of how much investment comes forward. And I'll come to in a moment to where we've been successful with this. But you need to start creating those small wins to build that delivery capacity, to develop that that credibility, and really find a way to make sure that the language which partners are using encourages that focus, encourages that collaboration, and also an ambition and expectation of how you're going to work. The thing which I've not put on the slide, but which I would absolutely impress again on local authority colleagues, is that don't underestimate the resource that it's going to take in terms of dedicated people and continued conversations with political colleagues across the chamber to make sure that we've got those different views coming forward. If I can move to the next slide. So some tangible changes which we've seen, and we're focused just here around some of the growth and regeneration areas. One of the really positive outcomes for us from our attendance at REEF was that in October of last year, Council agreed that we would appoint Wilmot Dixon, supported by the developers Milligan, as our regeneration partner. So they are particularly engaged on 4 sites within Paignton and Torquay, where they're delivering Future High Street Fund and Town Deal projects. We've also been working with government on a Levelling Up partnership. So the Chancellor announced this in March of last year, and we made a deliberate decision to use our place board and to use Torbay Story as the frame for our Levelling Up partnership. So what we've said to Department for Levelling Up officials is that the Levelling Up partnership is the way in which we want to be able to make Torbay Story real for the community, and that, I think, was a real positive for us. It's helped us tell that story not just to DLUC but also to some other Whitehall departments and certainly to their agencies, and help bring Torbay to life in a different way. So we're using that just to keep reiterating the story. I think we'll need in probably the next 18 months, 2 years, to look and see where we need to change it, and also, as I mentioned, what we need to do to translate this into something which is real for people on the ground. But that translation will only really come through when we start to get projects on site and then completed. We've had something like 105, 110 million pounds of government investment committed to us over the last 3 years, including Town Deal and Future High Street Fund, but also Levelling Up Partnership, Levelling Up Fund, Heritage Places, and long-term plan for towns for Torquay. And I don't think that we would have been able to be as effective, irrespective of our stats and the need for change. We wouldn't have been so effective if we'd not had the ability to use the Torbay Story as the way in which we bound all of those different aspects together. We've been able to set out to government that this is a clear stakeholder partner backed proposition, rather than simply this being the local authority doing it on its own. So that's the key messages. The image, which hopefully you can see on the screen, for those of you that know Torquay, this will be our new Harbourside Public Realm. The project is underway right now, and hopefully if you come down later in the year or in the summer of 2025, you'll see something that looks very much like that, with hopefully a few more visitors. And I'll leave it there. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Alan. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay, but I think reiterate a lot what Alan said there with investment. So I'm Rachel Bailey, I'm the Burnley Place brand manager, and I'm going to talk to you about why Burnley needed a place brand and what we've done to put that in action. Can we have the next slide, please? And the next one, sorry. So why did Burnley need a place brand? 15 years ago, Burnley was really struggling. It had a decline in population. Our businesses were finding it hard to recruit, and it just wasn't seen internally and externally as a thriving place to have a business, live, study, or visit. And we couldn't even get builders like Barratt Homes to come to Burnley. Of course, this opinion wasn't across the board, but the stats and public perception surveys spoke volumes, and something had to change. Smog and chimneys, empty and boring, small and grim, a dinosaur. It's not moved on. Between 2003 and 2007, the Department for Education and Skills said Burnley had a 9.2% of secondary school capacity is unfilled places. Many parents chose to send their children to schools outside of the borough, and the government announced a review into Burnley. It was clear that public and private sector had to come together to lead this change. Next slide, please. What we did. In 2009, Burnley Council and 5 founding members of the private sector launched the burnley.co.uk place brand and the Burnley bondholders. Our place brand is separate from council branding, and we're an independent team of 3. You saw us on that first slide. and we run it. We're council employees, but our budget comes from both the local authority and our now 200 paying private sector members. We're a ring-fenced resource, so we're full-time focused on place brand. We also deliver the Burnley Lifestyle magazine, In Business Burnley, the Film in Burnley service, press visits, several social media accounts. We deliver about 20 events a year. We visit our Burnley bondholders on a daily basis to find out their good news, and we also act as the bridge between the council's business support team and the private sector. A sister brand, Burnley Social, was also created in 2019 to target a younger demographic. It's got its own branding, events, social media and tone of voice, and this is targeted towards young people to raise aspirations and awareness of the amazing jobs and work-life balance we have in Burnley. This also includes us going into schools and working closely with our university and college. Next slide, please. So who are the Burnley bondholders? The Burnley Bondholders is a public-private initiative where businesses pay to be ambassadors of the borough. In return, they come together for the greater good of Burnley, to raise its prosperity, to have a seat at the table with our plans, and of course receive numerous PR and networking benefits. We started with 5 businesses and now have 200. All 5 put money in the brand pot to get started, alongside a healthy top-up from the council. This placed value on the brand and what the council was trying to do in partnership with the private sector. With skin in the game, the private sector supported the brand and were prepared for the uphill battle to change perceptions, fight for more government investment to the north, and find both homegrown talent and attract those from surrounding areas. I know when I speak to other local authorities that Burnley's brand and bondholder scheme is held in high regard. Our bondholders were instrumental in lobbying for a direct rail link to Manchester, helping to attract the University of Central Lancashire and getting big projects like Pioneer Place, our new leisure complex, over the line. Next slide, please. Today's story. It's important to keep your eye on the bigger picture, like Alan said. Do not expect instant results. Fast forward to today, and where our population was declining by 5% a year, the 2021 census showed our population had risen by 9%, which is around 7,000 people. It's no coincidence when you see the investment into Burnley. We're on track to deliver almost 4,000 new homes by 2032, and yes, Barratt Homes now has several developments here. Burnley Council is the top college in England. The bondholders pay around £100,000 a year for the privilege of being a bondholder and having a seat at the table in all of this, and UCLan is continuously growing its campus. Whereas every press mention of Burnley seemed to mention our declining cotton industry, socio-economic challenges and political makeup, now you'll see us on Netflix, in the Bank of Dave, or on Sky, following Burnley FC moving back into the Premier League, or coverage of our beautiful cultural assets and countryside and our entrepreneurial spirit. Next slide, please. Our future leaders. But we cannot be complacent, which is why it's essential to pass on the baton to the next ambassadors, and there are several ways we're making sure this passion for Burnley is developed. In March last year, we launched the Future Leaders Programme. This is a 12-month initiative for people under the age of 30 who work at a Burnley bondholder. It challenges and develops them both personally and professionally. The purpose is to instil passion and pride in our future leaders about working and living in Burnley, helping to retain their talent in the borough and take their new skills and experience to their employer with fresh ideas and ways of working. The programme is hosted at UCLan's innovative Victoria Mill campus, with the university partnering with the bondholders for this. We had an application process and have taken on 10 participants, with a mix of companies from huge global aerospace to boutique PR agencies. We went out to tender for a programme leader. UCLan allow us to use their facilities for free, and the full £13,000 cost is from the bondholder budget. It's a big chunk, but we believe now is the time to pass on the baton to our future leaders and ensure they have the same passion and vision for Burnley. And if anyone else still thinks Burnley is all smog and chimneys, empty and boring, small and grim, and a dinosaur that's not moved on, I'll hopefully leave this video with you.
I did some work experience before university and realised that I actually don't need to go to Manchester, Liverpool, the big cities to work at a top law firm, and I can just work here in Burnley and still work for a brilliant law firm. Hello, my name's Amy Duncan. I'm a solicitor in our corporate team here at Farley's in Burnley. I went to university to study law, and at the time I went to university you could only sort of go to the big city, so I had to travel all the way to Liverpool. I know that now times have changed, things like the college, they're also doing law degrees right here in Burnley, so you don't actually have to travel. You can even qualify here. We've had lots of work experience students come into our Burnley office and then realising that they actually don't have to travel to big cities to qualify or even to study law. A lot of my friends have been shocked at how I can work at such a great firm, but right here in Burnley. I know that they spend a fortune in parking, things like lunchtime, just going out into Manchester for dinners can cost a lot, whereas here we love going out into the town, places like the Mechanics across the road. I actually used to dance there when I was younger, so it's great just to be back where I'm used to, and things like the Little Barista and Palazzo. There's lots of lovely places that are sort of big city quality, but right here in Burnley and a fraction of the price. My school's quite local to Burnley, and we did a law club in about year 9, so I must have been about 14, and we got to travel to a court and do like a real life setting in a court, and then from there I wanted to do some work experience, and obviously I couldn't drive, so I looked into the buses, the local bus route. We've got great public transport here in Burnley, and I found Farley's, so I used to get the bus to Farley's for about 2 weeks in summer, and then went there every year from about year 9 to about just after university. I've actually done work experience in a big city firm, and I don't think half of the I even met any partners, whereas here all of the partners know my name. If I walk past them in the street or in the office, any office, they'll all say hello, check in, how am I doing. Even sort of senior members of staff, they're always interested into what I'm doing, how they can help, and you just would never get that in a big city firm. I think a really full circle moment for me was we used to go out all the time when I was younger in Burnley, and one of the clubs that I actually used to go to, the guy that owns that, I actually sold his house for him last year when I was training in the commercial property department. So I think it was just a really full circle moment knowing that there is actually local people, and that's where you get sort of the personal approach, because you can say things like, oh, I've actually used to go to your business, or things like that, so that's great. Farley's as a firm has been part of the bondholders scheme for quite a while now, so I've been to a couple of just the normal bondholders events, which were amazing, and lovely to see such a sort of big businesses, really big businesses. We've got places like Crowwood at the event. We started the Future Leaders scheme now, which is, for my age, it's a lot less daunting because everybody's similar age, everybody's young, and they're really trying to sort of bring up future leaders, and it's been great because I haven't found anything else like that at the moment. So we do try and do quite a lot of networking things, and there's just nothing out there that I've seen, and it's just great for younger people to sort of, at the same level as me, sort of newly qualified, 1 year qualified, and sort of we've got the same aspirations and everybody's local, so it's really great to sort of bounce ideas off each other and get to know people in the area. We feel that our local office here in Burnley is absolutely invaluable because a lot of people prefer just to see somebody face to face and get a real person to speak to. Our offices are quite big here. We have had actually a few people just walk in and say, look, I've got this problem, can you help? And that it's more convenient for them. Sort of they walk past, we're in the centre, they can get some lunch, they're easy to get to. And it's just that more personal approach. They know that people here are local and they're happy to help. There's absolutely no better example of hometown pride than the 35,000 people that were just out here celebrating Burnley being champions and being promoted to the Premier League, because we're all Premier around here.
Thank you, and I'm now going to hand you over to Chris Standish.
Brilliant, thank you. Who wants to live in Burnley? I know I do. I don't live too far away from it. There is one other thing, is the Weavers Triangle. People are thinking about Burnley. The Weavers Triangle, unbelievable heritage-led regeneration in Burnley, just up the road from me there. So thank you. I thought that was excellent. Thank you very much. Just a brief little thing from myself. I'm Chris. I sort of head up the community engagement function here at Homes England, and I just wanted 5 minutes of your time to let you know what we're doing at Homes England in terms of engaging with communities, really trying to drive forward a sense of linked social value, really important, and that sense of uniqueness of place as well. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So we have a brilliant strategic plan. It's hopefully in the chat somewhere, or you can find it on the internet. The strategic plan is really, really important because it talks about something more than housing outputs. It talks about place-based outcomes. You know, well-designed places that work for people, regeneration, it talks about the places that reflect community needs. So it's fundamental to what we do. How can we have an understanding of community-led needs by this community engagement approach that we have? So next one, please. So someone much smarter than me said a long time ago, always start with the why. And if you're not too sure, keep going back to the why. Always ask why. So what are our motivations for impactful community engagement? Why should we in Homes England care about it, and why should we bother about it? On the slide there is if these things have been informed by so many people across Homes England and our partners, and it's now in our plan. So whenever we're doing something in your area, these are the things that really, really matter to us. Some of them will be more relevant to you than others, but really, personally, if I can, the one in bold, understanding places and community priorities to deliver locally relevant social value through community engagement. Really, really important. So this is why we really care about it and why we think it's really important. Just the next one, please. At the heart of this, and particularly relevant to this presentation today, is something that we clumsily call, it has a bit of a strap line, locally relevant social value. I know social value can mean a lot of different things, but for us in the community engagement team, we're working with colleagues across the agency. I was speaking to a colleague this morning, Matt Wackett, really, really keen on it, talking about how we can understand locally relevant social value. Much earlier on in the process, a combination of data and a combination of conversations, qualitative stuff, to really get a sense of what is really, really important. Might be small things, but small can be significant. Small can be transformational. So really, really key, locally relevant social value, it's catching on, and it gives us a lens of outcomes, local outcomes that are really significant. If we're going to put some money into a place, if we're going to take a place through planning, whatever it is, we know what's really, really important. And that's really, it's a new set of glasses to see what we do and how we go about doing it and what we need to achieve. Next one. And what we've developed a phrase called place-based indicators. So these are locally agreed and defined issues and opportunities that impact a place over time. So it's not us telling people what they are. It's done with people. It's done collaboratively with partners and stakeholders and residents. They're owned by us. So we create them in a way that is owned by local people. And then we have to respond to some of them as much as we can on the projects that we're doing. Statistics, we look at data, loads of different data. We've got a few different tools as well. We use the Hacked Community Insight tool. But we also use something called a place standard tool at the moment as a way. It's worth having a look at the place standard tool if you've not used it before. It's a great way to have a collaborative conversation with your communities and with your stakeholders about what's really important and what's really specific. And then we use it to inform future visions. We use it to deliver locally relevant social value strategies. We ask our consultants to deliver some of this stuff on the back of it as well. So before we get any planning certainty, before contractors go in the ground, we're using our consultants that we're appointing with you, with colleagues from the other public sector bodies to try and generate impact on the ground. And we try and make it measurable and quantifiable at all stages. Next one. So it's ongoing. It's not a thing that we've finished. It's not a thing that we've got huge amounts of experience in. It's work in progress. We're trying to collaborate and do it as much as we possibly can on a range of projects. So Northstowe is the biggest new town in England, he says, or is it Britain? I think it's England. That's ongoing at the moment since Milton Keynes. York Central, people might have heard of that. It's a key regen project just at the back of York Central, back of York Station, forgive me. Dewsbury Riverside, much earlier in the process over in Kirklees, Grimsby, so a whole range of different sites, all at different stages, in different locations, involving different partners, where this idea of locally relevant social value linked to community engagement, linked to place-based indicators is coming forward, and we're starting to take it forward and we're starting to get there, and we're starting to have a real impact, and we're doing things with and not to. I think it's over to you, Abby.
Great, thanks, Chris. And thank you to all of our speakers today for those brilliant insights. I thought it was really great to hear about those really inspiring place-specific examples to sort of back up and complement John's point about placemaking and regeneration being a shared effort and a shared ambition. So we're now going to move into a bit of a Q&A session. So we've had a look through the chat as you've been putting those in, and we've selected some of the most popular questions. So if we could have all of our speakers, if you could kindly put your cameras back on, we'll launch straight into that Q&A. That's including you, Chris, you can't escape. Great. Great, so our first question then is a question directed towards Rachel and John. So I don't know if you can choose who wants to sort of kick it off, but how do you work with the partners through delivery and keep them engaged post delivery? So that's just considering that the process can take considerable time.
I'll let you go first, Rachel.
Okay, I would say obviously it's a partnership, so it's a two-way street. So your ambassadors and other stakeholders obviously should be coming into this knowing that it's not just about taking from the place brand, but giving too. So for example, with our bondholders, we always saying, send us your good news stories. You know, we've got 2 magazines that go out across the country. We've got 9 social media channels. Obviously, you've seen our YouTube, an example of our YouTube channel there. Tell us your good stories. We can promote you, you know, help us by going into schools to do mock interviews to raise aspirations, and also throw it back on them a bit. Like, they need to promote the place as well. It's kind of what they're signing up to do. The point being is they are the ambassadors that are spreading the good news about your place across their network. So I would say in a nice, polite way, just explain to them that it's, you need, you know, it's on you as well to keep this going. It's not just down to the team running the place brand.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think one of the points was about development taking a long time. I think in terms of the coming together of ambassadors that we see, they're hearing about all sorts of things in the place, and it's not just about their input. They can get involved by the networking part of it, and that's very powerful as well in terms of making fresh contacts, and also hearing about things that are not just in the immediate area but the wider area that would have an impact on the place. That might be, you know, through county, nearby city, etc. So I think it's just always about trying to find things that are interesting, and certainly in the ambassador programs that we get involved in, I mean, most of those are bi-monthly, and as I said in my piece, a lot of those are now over 10 years and they've been meeting bi-monthly. One of the things that some of them do is go to the alumni of the place as well, who have got a connection and may be doing, you know, very interesting jobs elsewhere, but want to also talk about their link to the place and what it meant to them as well as their role.
Brilliant, thank you both. Moving into our second question. So this is one, if I can direct this at you, Alan, to start, and then maybe Rachel, if you had anything to add. But in times of financial austerity for councils, of course, everyone's sort of struggling. What advice would you have about creating a financially sustainable place narrative and framework?
That it's difficult to do. It's going to require some form of prioritization in all likelihood, and because, you know, what we deal with in place for the most part is it's not statutory. We're always going to be in that sort of challenging discussion when it comes to this time of year for us in local authority settings when we're going through the budget discussions. So there's been, from a Torbay perspective, a little bit of borrowing of time and the identification of people we can bring on, essentially on almost internal secondments to pick up some of these aspects, but understanding the skill sets that you need in those individuals. And I think there's a thread which is around developing those relationships and the importance of that story. You know, we will be in a better position to respond on some of those financial pressures long term if we're able to address the investment if we're able to bring forward more businesses, better businesses who are going past the VAT threshold, who are taking spaces that need business rates. So helping tell the story to your director of finance or to the portfolio leader about, actually, it's not going to help you in the next 12 months, but over the next 10 years, this is where you need to get to. So understanding that this is a long-term play, and that if you want to see something turned around immediately, then there are probably, frankly, there are not necessarily cheaper ways to do it, but there are easier ways to make that change. So getting that internal story right, telling your colleagues about the importance of it, and making sure you keep coming to that, back to that, and being consistent in advocacy, really. And then it's that development of the relationships, which is probably something which comes across a number of the questions which I think we're going to pick up this morning.
Yeah, just to add to that, obviously Burnley kind of, there was no other option. Like, parents weren't sending the kids to the schools, population was declining, businesses didn't want to be here. So, like, what was the alternative? Just to let it run into the ground completely. So I guess we were starting from that base point, so it wasn't as hard a sell. Another thing, I know it can be a bit controversial, is charging your ambassadors. We've been going 15 years and we have 200, which I know many places have hundreds more, but they're all paying. Like I said, they pay about £100,000 a year. So that is a fair, that's a good budget to be going at. Obviously it's voluntary, so we can't make them pay it, but they all do year after year. So we can count on one hand the number of ambassadors who leave in a year, and it's usually totally out of our control, like they're leaving the borough or something. So I would say it works. You need to place value on it, and our CEO is quite open that the long-term investment of the Place brand has reaped rewards many times over in the business rates that we get back.
Great, thank you both. So our next question is, what benefits do you think having a BID, so a bid, brings? How do you get the most out of your bids? And if I can go to John for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bids, whenever we're working in a place, if there's a bid, that's usually really important, because the bids they're place led. They're all about the place. They have connections with the stakeholders already, which is massively important. And in various of the work that we've done, the bid has actually led on place activity beyond its red line boundary, and that's because there's a recognition that if the whole of the place is successful and does well, then the area of the bid within that red line will also be doing well. So I think it is about thinking bigger picture, but I mean, a bid, actually, as I say, is massively important, and I think it's just about having that strategic view. I mean, bids have lots of things that they can do and influence, and some of that might be events, some of that might be about beautification, public realm, but I think there is also that strategic role in terms of what is the place going to be for going forward, and various of them, as I say, have gone down that route.
Thanks, John. Okay, our next question that we've got is, how have you had to adapt your approach to engage with young people? So I'll start with Chris for this one, if you've got any insight on sort of working with young people.
I'll be really quick, which is peer-to-peer engagement. I mean, young people are one of the key important to reach groups in all projects and in all settings. And the only way genuinely it works, and Victoria Keane is on the call from Carbon Homes. Sorry, she's absolutely brilliant. It's peer-to-peer engagement. That is what works, definitely.
Great. And Alan, can I come to you as well for maybe that more place-specific response?
Yeah, certainly. So we, when we were awarded the town deal cash for Torquay in 2020, we recognised that there's a very strong engagement around local plan, neighbourhood planning, but there's a particular part of the community that typically gets involved with those sorts of more formal structures. And we see with our business community that there's a there's a lack of representation for some of our younger business owners. There's a lack of representation for younger people within a lot of that sort of civic discussion. So we made a very conscious decision that we wanted to be able to find a way to get the voice of under 25s, and you could draw that line, you know, wherever, but we made a conscious decision we wanted to get more under 25s involved. So we had we did it probably quite traditionally. Would we do it in this way now? Probably not, but we put a note out to say we wanted to have essentially kind of expressions of interest come forward if you wanted to get involved. So I think we had 7 people come forward. We've asked 3 of them to join our community board, which supports the Torquay Town Deal board. And what we're trying to do now is work through that in terms of the champions, how we get more younger people involved. It's not perfect, but we're trying to get that as a principle. How do we communicate them? The peer-to-peer point that Chris made, but how do we communicate effectively, and how do we get away from maybe some of our more traditional ways of thinking about marketing that comes from a local authority perspective? So we're setting out messages in a different way, so using video more, and I've been embarrassed enough to have to do a couple of those myself, but my kids would never let me go on TikTok if I tried. But it's a difficult one for us. I think you've got to challenge some of your organizational conventions and norms, and you've got to realize that there will be a longer burn before you probably start to get the sort of results that you want. But getting the conversation underway, peer-to-peer, otherwise, getting that conversation underway is just absolutely critical.
And Rachel, you've had obviously some great successes by the sounds of it with working with young people. So could I ask you what were sort of challenges and benefits in setting up the Future Leaders scheme specifically?
I guess the challenge was we'd never done that before, so it was kind of getting the purpose across of why we were doing it. Also, we kind of tried to embody what we're saying. So we're only a team of 3, but one of our team members started as an apprentice within the team, and he was a degree apprentice, and he's now works with us full time, and he leads that Burnley social brand and kind of the events for younger people. So it's recognising that don't presume you know what they actually want, like get somebody who is in that demographic to do that. So it was, starting from scratch. I think it was also getting across the commitment to the young people. They do meet the Future Leaders programme, the 12-month programme. They do meet monthly. They meet outside of this. They're doing social value projects. We had them on an away day, jumping off things. And it was, I think, maybe they didn't quite comprehend the commitment that we expected of them. However, it's been an incredible success. We're actually taking them down to the House of Lords in March to celebrate the end of that first cohort. Many have gone on to get promotions. One's even left his company, set up as a consultant, and then joined the bondholders as his own limited company. So because he was so desperate to stay on the course and become a bondholder, we get them speaking at events, really pushing them out of the comfort zone. And even before we've opened up cohort 2, we've already got a bit of a waiting list going on for that. And I just think it's really getting across the fact that this is £13,000 of that £100,000 bondholder money. It's a big investment, but it's worth it because you need to, because once we see the same faces at events, but once they go on to retire, like, what are you going to do then? You need the next generation kind of come in. And also we've done a spin-off events for them. We found from feedback that perhaps the younger ones were a bit intimidated coming into a room with 150 people who were quite well established in their careers and all knew each other. So we've done some spin-off smaller events around the 40-50 mark, more informal, but still with really cool speakers and things. So I would say is getting them on board with something they'd not seen evidence of, but now with 12 months nearly down the line, the appetite's there, which is great. And our ideal situation would be we get long-term government funding for this, so it doesn't need to keep coming out of the bondholders pot, and maybe we become a blueprint for other places.
That's great. That's really inspiring to hear, and it's quite clear that you're really passionate about that as well. So it's nice to sort of hear you talk about that. So thank you both. Okay, so the next question we have from somebody working at Carbon Homes. So at Carbon, they're working on their Fair Foundations place strategy in 2 places, so Stanley in Durham and Biker in Newcastle. So they've asked, at times engaging with the health sectors, so the NHS and also the private sector can be a bit more challenging. Do you have any advice for housing or place professionals navigating other sectors and networks? And I'm going to direct that question at Alan to start, if that's okay with you, Alan.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to recognise it's going to take time to get a proper understanding some of the drivers, some of the issues which are coming in for those sectors. The health one it's a constant source of attention for us. We have a new hospital programme for the Torbay and South Devon NHS Trust, who've got their acute hospital site within Torquay. So they have a 490 million pound scheme there, plus the pressures of delivering day-to-day services, and as with probably every trust up and down the country, just the operational challenges for them to carry on business as usual are such that I think it's pretty difficult sometimes for the NHS as a system and for the individuals within it to really get the importance of this. So I think for me, there is a consistency between what I set out in the earlier answer around the finances, but also the NHS. We know that economic well-being is one of the key determinants of health. So ensuring that we're having those sorts of conversations with the right leaders within the NHS about the importance of them being involved within the place process, the place system, having those conversations, building up those relationships, and understanding where what we are trying to do can helpfully address some of their issues and help them get to better outcomes. So, for instance, the One Public Estate programme, looking at how we might be able to co-locate facilities, or how we might be able to bring forward on some of the sites which we've identified in our town centres, either some form of clinical or diagnostic provision or key worker that's going to help them with their recruitment and retention issues. So I think it's really trying to understand what are the drivers that your partners are facing, how does that relate then back to the place, and what can the role be of whatever we call our place partnership to help them address that. But I think with health colleagues especially, just recognising just the sheer complexity and the challenge of their day-to-day operation is really important from our perspective. If you're trying to go in there, you've got to recognise that you might end up talking to 4 or 5 different people to essentially have the same conversation. So it is complex, it is going to take time, and there will be some missteps along the way. If you don't get a response back, I think keep going, be persistent with it, and keep trying to find a way to have that conversation.
Great, thanks, Alan. Does anyone else in the panel have anything else to add?
Yeah, just to build on that, I think one of the big things for health that we see is what Alan's just talked about, which is recruitment. So we're just doing a lot of work up in Cumberland, around Carlisle, around that area, and they are massively short-staffed, and they actually do buy into the fact that this whole idea of having a place-led approach, trying to get the message out, is going to be critical for them. Previously, they've used it for GP recruitment across the country, because the bit that they have got, of course, is a wonderful work-life balance and a fantastic environment to be in. So it is attractive, but they're just not on the radar all the time. So I think the place approach really helps them in terms of understanding that. So I would say it is relevant, but there are an awful lot of people, as Alan said, spread across health, who you have to find the right ones to engage with, who get it, and not everybody does, particularly because they're so pressured.
Great, thank you. Okay, brilliant. So I have a question directed at you now, Chris. So how do you sustain long-term engagement with residents and stakeholders on projects that are sort of 20 years plus in the making, so really longer term projects?
Excellent, thank you. So, of which we've got quite, we've got quite a few. We're not quite like councils where you're always there with your communities, but we are involved in places longer than traditional housing developers. Perhaps not as long as some of the anchor institutions and your RPs, but we are there quite a little bit. So the key thing that we found over the years, I suppose, it is to really focus on the motivations. If your motivations are really, really hardwired into your organization's approach to effective engagement, you will genuinely get a real sense of empowering, doing things with, not doing things to, and building trust. I mean, the real thing for me personally is to try and build boinginess. It might seem crackers, but there's a wonderful Scottish bloke who used to work for Claire's. I'm sure you might know who I'm alluding to. Absolutely fantastic, Neil McEnroy. He used to talk about boinginess of places all the time, particularly places that are perhaps a little bit more challenging than others. Oldham, Rochdale, Stockport, Burnley. You can list them all off. More challenging, gritty places. How can you engage with communities to make them more resilient and more boinginess? Loads of URP folk that are on this call talk about community investment, investing in communities to make them more resilient, jobs for locally relevant people that really, really need it. So I think if your engagement approach is genuinely focused on doing things with and not to, and trying to generate these outcomes, whatever the outcomes that you really want are, you will get this resilience piece sort of coming out, and you'll get trust, and you'll get much better quality housing and regeneration development that takes place as well.
Great, thank you, Chris. Does anyone else want to add anything with this being a sort of, this will be a last question? No, that's absolutely fine. Great. So I think that's all the questions we have time for today. So thank you all. Thank you to our panel for those sort of brilliant contributions, and thanks to our audience as well for lots of great questions. I've really enjoyed that session. So we're now going to start to wrap up and then get a little bit of feedback from you before we finish. These slides will go out to you afterwards, but we've got some sort of take-home messages on the slides, sort of top tips as well. But I'd just like to say a massive thank you to our brilliant speakers. So we've got John Till, Alan Denby, Rachel Bailey and Chris Standish. And thank you to everyone for attending today. So that does conclude today's session. So we have finished a little bit early, so that means I'll give you sort of 15 minutes back, maybe have a little bit of a longer lunch today. But thank you all for your input throughout the session. That's been brilliant. And thank you all very much. See you soon.